across the line. Kiwi will make the ball. It's Cadford last. Kiwi's won the Melbourne Cup.
This is how it was in the beginning. An ancient continent washed by ancient seas. The changing features of the landscape perceptible only across the vastness of countless ages. A land imprinted by the timeless etchings of nature and by the seasons. It was always, this Victoria, a land of seasons. And when people came to this land, they were moulded by the seasons. Each spring, as the high peaks of the Victorian Alps begin shedding their last remnants of winter, as the icy water from the mountain streams warms on its journey to the foothills and on down to the sea, Victorians celebrate a seasonal commitment to a lifestyle and cultural heritage peculiarly and affectionately unlike any other. Nowhere is there a more jubilant expression of things Victorian than at the Melbourne Cricket Ground on Grand Final Day. Each September, Victorians gather to witness an event which, above all others, binds the old and the new, transcends social barriers, and encompasses those things which bring and hold together a nation or a state. Here in one event is love of spectacle, the display of fervent loyalties, the devotion to cherished tradition.
And it's going to Dermot Brereton.
Like many things Victorian, Australian football has become in its own way institutionalised, deeply embedded in the cultural psyche, commanding homage at once sublime and exuberant. It is indeed a truly Victorian pursuit, its origins uniquely Victorian, representing a singular departure from English colonial sentiment in a land where elsewhere that sentiment is manifest. Grand finals themselves are played not just on an oval, but on one created for the fundamental purpose of fostering that most noble of English sporting traditions, the game of cricket. When Englishmen came to this distant outpost of the realm, they brought their heritage with them. They found verdant pastures amid rolling green hills, and they built stately mansions replete with all that was distinctively English, that evoked a strong sense of familiarity with and attachment to their own countryside half a world away. They left enduring reminders of their founding culture, of the England of Shakespeare's royal throne of kings, his other Eden, demi-paradise. The substance of a state, its economic worth, is measured in the flow of investment through its corporate structure. For much of the state's 150 years, Victoria's corporate and financial base has controlled influential sectors of the nation's economic framework. On the floor of the Melbourne Stock Exchange, the financial lions of Collins Street pace and prowl amid a constant surge of pensive energy, watching with an intense glint of the eye, pouncing and retreating, restive in their endless pursuit of corporate gains. In such fashion, vast amounts weave in and out of the financial system, aided by sharp judgments and critical reflexes that determine the minute-to-minute shifts in fortunes for the computerized corporate balance sheets. Wealth and its place in the regulated order of things has been a singular preoccupation in the developing patterns that have forged Victoria's business establishment. In its earliest form, the wealth that built Victoria came in a way that few possessed of a founding vision of Victorian greatness would have foreseen. It burst forth literally in a rush, in a frenzied wave that swept beyond the undefined borders of a region on the threshold of statehood. Victoria, indeed the world, heard of the discovery of gold at almost precisely the time that proclamation of statehood was announced. It was 1851, 17 years after the Henty brothers brought sheep from Tasmania to Portland and laid claim to the pastoral settlement of Victoria. 16 years after Batman and Faulkner arrived on the banks of the Yarra to dispute the legitimate founding of the city of Melbourne. From the soil around Ballarat and Bendigo, Castlemaine and Beechworth came riches undreamed of by the tens of thousands of fortune seekers who scrambled for the nuggets and flecks being dug and crushed and panned in the mining fields, richer by far than any in the world. Whatever the individual fortunes, Victoria had struck it rich. New buildings went up, new towns emerged, businesses boomed. There was euphoria and jubilation as the wealth from the goldfields financed a great surge of endeavour, of expansion and resounding confidence. Much of the grand and elaborate architecture of Melbourne's finest buildings, its magnificent and gracious homes, came directly or indirectly from the northern goldfields. Those decades from the 1850s through the 1880s generated a diversity and richness of identity, an enduring devotion to the arts, the creation of great institutions of learning, the establishment of Victoria's future leadership in commerce and finance, the moulding of the state's political character. They were years that brought forth events that stamped the period as one of the most colourful in Victoria's history. The Melbourne Cup, Eureka Stockade, the Kelly Gang, the first 8-hour working day. The prosperity of the times brought a network of railways, one of the world's finest tramway systems, the floating of the future giant of Australian enterprise, BHP, and gas, an industry that's been a major part of Victoria's development for 130 of its 150 years. Such expansive energy, such affluence and flamboyant development might have created a different kind of Victoria. Instead, approaching the 60th year of their history, Victorians encountered a traumatic change of fortune, a crisis that profoundly and radically altered their lifestyle, indeed their very nature. The final decade of the 19th century was to bring Victoria the worst of times. Excessive borrowings, large-scale land speculation, financial overcommitment, and a rural slump brought the financial system crashing down. Banks went bust, businesses went broke, and the jobless in their thousands took their swags and went on the road, out of Melbourne, out of Victoria. The depression of the 1890s in some ways marked Victoria forever. It was a devastating blow to the city that had become the nation's banking capital, a setback that took more than a decade to overcome. In those 10 years, Victoria lost more people than it had gained in the fabulous years of the gold rush. Once Australia's premier city, Melbourne lost its population lead to Sydney and never quite regained it. Battered by such acute loss of confidence, Victoria withdrew into a conservatism that still permeates much of the Victorian attitude. But jubilation did return, and with it a measure of restored dignity and honour. First with a royal visit to mark the Diamond Jubilee of their Queen, and 4 years later when Federation came to Australia in 1901. There was pageantry and celebration when the Duke and Duchess of York opened the first Commonwealth Parliament to begin a 26-year term for Melbourne as the seat of national government. Men and women of distinction emerged in the arts, in politics, the law and medicine, in commerce. And Victoria was renewing again, building on its strong rural base and developing its major pursuits in manufacturing. Victoria has, in its history, undergone changes of the most significant kind, some more lasting than others. Religion came to Victoria in the 1860s in a great wave of spiritual fervour, generated in part by the fundamental strength of the church in the lives of those British migrants who came to join the gold rush and the prosperity that generated. Magnificent churches were built to glorify not only the word of the scriptures, but the inspirational grandeur of their own architecture. The church became a powerful and dominant force for community opinion, promoting unity of the family, encouraging adherence to moral values, stridently assaulting the evils of alcohol, and demanding righteous respect for the Sabbath. For the rest of that century and beyond, the social force of church opinion established a Victorian ethic that was to remain, for the most part, steadfast and resolute. Through its history, Victoria has embraced its heritage and established a clear commitment to respect tradition, honour achievement, and acknowledge those sacrificial demands that history in its course imposes. In 1914, Victorians went to war, answering the patriotic call of king and country. From the mud of the trenches onto Gallipoli they fought, and they died in their thousands. Victoria and a nation mourned, and when the war was over and the troops came home, Victorians honoured their dead, indeed glorified them, with a monument more striking, more splendid than all of the hundreds of memorials built in towns and cities throughout Australia. The Shrine of Remembrance became a symbol of reverence and inspiration, honouring all who served, and those who had offered what became known as the Supreme Sacrifice, to all who gave their name to the legend of Anzac. In other ways, the artistry of stone creates in Victoria its own special recognition of past deeds, of past virtues, of achievements. Those early craftsmen, the stonemasons, who helped fashion the architectural heritage of the cities, demanded and won concessions for shorter working hours, achieving agreement with employers to the introduction of the first 8-hour working day, well in advance of similar concessions in other trades. Labour Day is no longer the tradition it was, but there remains, at the very least, a sentimental awareness of early advances for a workforce whose skills helped develop Victoria's major industries. In the gathering pace of post-war progress, the world seemed somehow to be moving too fast, spinning into a vortex of decadence from which, said the moralists, there would be no salvation. The increasing mobility of the new age was offering a new generation unbounded freedom. While the outrageous Charleston confronted the sedate waltz, the older generation lamented the dread legacy of progress and gravely pondered the inevitable downfall of civilized behavior. But in reality, there was no retreat. The new forms of transport were a clear statement of the most radical, most permanent patterns of change. In shipping, ancient mariners who'd roamed the great oceans of the world sailed into the gathering twilight, furled their canvas and came ashore. Monuments to their times live on, evoking visions of a proud and majestic race of men who became victims of time and of mankind's relentless pursuit of progress. The greatest leap forward came when men took to the skies. In its 100th year, Victoria made world headlines when it staged the spectacular England to Australia centenary air race. Aviators C.W. Scott and Tom Campbell Black circled Flemington Racecourse at the finish of the record-making 3-day flight, setting new long-distance standards that led the way for the world's emerging commercial aviation industry. No form of transport has remained closer to the heart of Victoria than the trams that rumble through the streets of the city and suburbs. They've been around for 100 years, drawn first by horses, then by underground cables, and for most of the last 60 years, powered by electricity. The Melbourne tram is as much a symbol of Victorian identity as Collins Street, the Yarra and football, or the Melbourne Cup. The Victorian passion for horse racing and horse breeding developed early in the state's history, and it was the Melbourne Cup, first run in 1861, that was to become the turf classic of Australia, the nation's premier horse racing and social event. There were times when the horse was an inseparable part of the landscape, when the land supported a prosperous rural economy. The urge to preserve significant aspects of the past has allowed the horse to remain a historically relevant, if diminishing, part of the landscape, one that provides an evocative reminder of the substance of pastoral Victoria. For the first half of its 150 years, Victoria's economic strength came from the land, from wool and wheat, and later from the developing irrigation areas and from the choice dairying land in the Gippsland region. Today, the Victorian countryside, through the rich western districts, the Wimmera and the Mallee, the irrigation farms along the Murray, the wine-growing districts, still produces a great wealth and diversity of primary product. Victoria's secondary industries grew to dominance in the 1920s, overtaking primary industry in productive wealth. And 30 years after that, the state began exploiting its major source of future economic expansion, its huge natural resources. From beneath the land came vast quantities of brown coal to power industry, and offshore, beneath the waters of Bass Strait, came oil, and in its natural form, that other resource that has been a vital part of Victoria's development for most of its history, gas. Within a mere 9 years of the founding settlement on the banks of the Yarra, gas was being manufactured by a Fitzroy blacksmith, and in one way or another, it has been part of Victoria ever since. Today, the symbolic blue flame that serves 1 million homes, bringing warmth, comfort and convenience, provides an ongoing link with the early history of Victorian home life. Victorians are, by nature, a seasonal race, a people grown up possessed of an instinctive feel for the seasons, influenced by the splendid panorama that comes with the seasons. They have thus inherited a special affinity with the course of nature, a consuming capacity to absorb the joys of their seasons. But for all the blessings nature bestows on its people, there comes a turning point, a harshness that spreads across the land in summer that gives warning of impending savagery. It comes with a dryness, with heat that evaporates, that goes on until the land is bare, until fierce summer winds whip up the soil, gather whole tracts of land into enormous grit-laden clouds that sweep the country, blotting out the sun. Much of Victoria is heavily forested, and when the forests dry out, when there's no moisture left, a number of critical factors begin to merge. The ultimate formula for disaster comes with tinder dry undergrowth, temperatures soaring beyond the high 30s, low humidity, and a scorching northerly wind. First, a wisp of smoke, a faint crackling, a gathering roar, then a thunderous eruption as the forest explodes in savage fury, laying waste to the land and all living things in its path. In such violent encounters, Victorians for generations have fought. Many have died. Possessions of a lifetime have been obliterated. Such tragedy is not new to Victorians. Their land has been ravaged before. It will happen again. Nature in this part of the country is like that. But nature, for all its destructive force, has a way of healing. Soon the summer will move into winter, the winter will give way to spring, the wattle will bloom, new life will stir, and the wounds will heal. Each day, Victoria finds a new way of celebrating the richness of new life, new energy, new promise. In many things Victorian, there is a constant newness, a constant striving for advancement, for new achievements. It emerges in the fields of medical and scientific research, where gifted men and women arrive at new formulas to take mankind a little further in the endless voyage of human discovery. Victorians are served by increasing use of their state's vast natural resources in industry and daily life, by the process of government which sets a course designed in the mind of Premier John Cain to enhance the quality of life and generate positive new directions. The finest resource the state has is its people, those with links to the founding generations, to those who came with the gold rush, and later in the great surge of post-war immigration through the 1950s. Today's Victoria draws its people from more than 100 nations, creating a progressive shift in attitudes and lifestyle. Victorians have faced adversity and triumphed, have sought riches and prospered, and in the unfolding of the years have created a uniqueness of blend and character. There is no clearly expressed view of the great Victorian dream, no apparent expansiveness of vision, yet it is there, in the essence of how Victorians see themselves and their land. The Victorian substance lies in commanding the means to secure the great promises of the future, while sustaining a deep commitment to preserving the richness of the past.